Hello, Mill Creek Intermediate. I hope you are enjoying your spring break. Today, I'm going to read to you Fannie in the Kitchen by Deborah Hopkinson, pictures by Nancy Carpenter, including helpful hints by Fannie. First course, the soup. We meet Marcia. Marcia Shaw could do many things extremely well. She could make long, perfect candles, scrub clothes on the washboard until they were spotless, and polish the oil lamps till they shined. Mama is lucky to have a helper like me, Marcia decided. But one day, Mama announced a girl named Fannie Farmer is coming here to live. She'll be my mother's helper. Well, what about me? Asked Marcia. I'm your helper. Yes, dear, said Mama, but with the baby coming, I need someone to cook. Marcia scowled at Mama's big fancy stove. She didn't want a new baby or a girl named Fannie. She could only hope Fannie Farmer didn't know how to cook. What do you think, Cardinals? How do you think that Marcia is feeling right now? Second course, a small success. But from the very first morning Fannie arrived, it was clear that she did know how to cook. Oh, what delicious eggs, Mama said at breakfast. Papa chewed happily. These biscuits so light and flaky. Marcia folded her arms. I won't eat, she decided. Then they'll be sorry they brought her here. Papa reached over and plucked a biscuit off her plate. Marcia, would you please ask Fannie if there are any more? Cardinals, how do you think Marcia is feeling now? How are her feelings different from her parents' feelings? Let's take a look at Fannie's hint. Biscuits should always be small. Large biscuits, though equally good, never tempt one by their daintiness. As Marcia pushed open the kitchen door, toasty warm smells tickled her nose. Papa wants more biscuits, she said rudely. Coming up, Fannie replied pleasantly. Fannie plunked a wooden spoon into Marcia's hand. You can help. Just spoon the dough onto the pan while I check the fire. Make them nice and small, Fannie added. Small biscuits are more dainty, don't you think? Marcia stood still. Why should I help? Still, it did look rather fun. Later, Marcia brought out her basket of steaming biscuits. She couldn't resist saying, I made them. After breakfast, Marcia snuck a biscuit and popped it into her mouth. It was a small, light, and flaky. Just delicious. Hey, Cardinals, can you tell your family members what the words dainty and plunked mean? Third course, the griddle cake mistake. Fannie was making griddle cakes, golden and brown and steaming hot, as Marcia watched. The biggest mistake with griddle cakes, said Fannie, waving her turner, is to flip them at the wrong time. When is the right time? Asked Marcia. Look at this one, Fannie instructed. Is it puffed? Marcia looked closely. It's puffed. Is it full of bubbles? Marcia nodded. Little bubbles were popping up all over. Then now is precisely the right time. With one sweep, Fannie flipped the cake in the air and neatly back onto the griddle. Cardinals, tell a family member, how do you know when it's time to flip a griddle cake? Before you turn the page, let's take a look at Fannie's hint. Drop batter by spoonfuls on a greased hot griddle. Cook on one side. When puffed, full of bubbles, and cooked on the edges, turn and cook the other side. Serve with butter and maple syrup. Let me try. Marcia grabbed the turner. I don't need help. I was watching. Fannie raised an eyebrow. Fine, I'll have a cup of tea. Marcia clutched the turner. She checked to see if Fannie was looking, but Fannie was curled up with a newspaper, cozy with the cat at her feet. Marcia flipped the first cake too early. It came out mushy in the middle. She flipped the second cake too late. It was already completely black on the edges. Then Marcia flipped the third griddle cake just when it was puffed and full of bubbles. She flipped it right onto the cat. Well, you did flip it at the right time, Fannie said. Precisely the right time. Fourth course, the egg disaster. When baby was born, Marcia wanted to bake a special cake for Mama, all by herself. After all, how hard could it be? Marcia put on Fannie's best apron. She measured flour, then beat the butter and sugar till they were light and fluffy. I'm baking a cake. I can do this extremely well, she said to herself. But when Marcia cracked the first egg into the bowl, pieces of shell fell into the batter. Even more shell dropped in when she cracked the second egg, and on the third, the most awful, most horrid, most hideous smell filled the kitchen. Fannie walked in and grabbed her nose. Oh, a rotten egg! Marcia looked at her ruined cake. Tears filled her eyes. Cardinals, what do you think is going to happen next in the story? Fannie's hint. The mixing and baking of cake requires more care and judgment than any other branch of cookery. But Fannie just waved a hand in the air. Oh, everyone finds rotten eggs sometimes. Next time, try this. She held up an egg. First, hold it in front of a candle flame in a dark room. The center should look clear. Second, place it in a basin of cold water. It should sink. Or third, place the large end of your cheek. A warmth should be felt. And so Marcia learned 3 ways to determine the freshness of eggs. Thank you, Fannie, she said. Now, could you help me bake a cake? Cardinals, tell a family member how you can determine if an egg is fresh. The 5th course, an excellent idea. After the baby came, all Mama wanted to do was play with him. Marcia found this disgusting, so she began to spend more time with Fannie in the kitchen. Marcia liked the kitchen. Mysterious spices scented the air, and copper pans gleamed above her head like autumn moons. And Marcia decided that after all, she kind of liked Fannie. Fannie seemed like a magician who could make mashed potatoes fluffier than clouds and blueberry pies sweeter than a summer sky. Fannie's hint. Correct measurements are absolutely necessary to ensure the best results. Cookery is magic, declared Marcia one day, crunching a hot ginger snap. Fannie shook her head. Preparing food well isn't magic. It's an art and a science that anyone can learn. Anyone but me, Marcia grumbled. There's too much to remember. At least you have it all in your head. I do have a lot in my head, Fannie said thoughtfully. But Marcia, what if I wrote out precise instructions for you? Then you could cook exactly the way that I do. Will you explain everything? Asked Marcia excitedly. How to mix a fancy cake, make a pot of soup, even measure a cup of flour? Everything, Fannie promised. Fannie got a huge notebook and began right away. She explained how to measure a spoonful of salt so that it was exactly level, and how to choose the ripest melons at the market. And she even wrote in directions for 3 ways to determine the freshness of eggs. Word of Fannie's notebook began to spread. Marcia's mother consulted it to make the special sauce Papa loved so much. Neighbors dropped in to borrow the recipe for this or that, or to ask Fannie's advice. Best of all, the notebook made cooking much easier for Marcia. Fannie, if I can learn to cook using your book, anyone can, Marcia said. Why, I believe you could teach the whole town of Boston to cook. What an excellent idea, said Fannie. Maybe I'll try. Sixth course, Marcia Shaw, Master Chef. And so Fannie decided to become a cooking teacher at the Boston Cooking School. Marcia was sad to see her go, but she was sure Fannie would be the best teacher there. Before Fannie left, Marcia wanted to bake her a special cake. She knew just what to do. Fannie's hint: before attempting to mix cake, study the book How to Measure and How to Combine Ingredients. Cardinals, how do you think Marcia is feeling about Fannie now? How have her feelings changed through the story? In Fannie's cookery notebook, Marcia found the recipe for golden cake. She read it carefully. She measured, mixed, and combined. Then she put the cake in the oven and baked it until it was done. You made this by yourself? Asked Mama in surprise. So tasty, Papa said with a mouthful. Even Baby got a piece. Fannie took a bite and chewed slowly. Marcia held her breath. Well, Marcia Shaw, you can do many things extremely well, Fannie announced at last. You can bake small, dainty biscuits, always spot a rotten egg, and flip griddle cakes at precisely the right time. Fannie paused. And you can also bake an excellent cake. Marcia laughed and picked her fork up. She took a bite of cake. It was just delicious. Cardinals, I hope you enjoyed this story about how Fannie Farmer was able to help Marcia Shaw and her family. The next chapter is called The Seventh Course, The Nuts, and more about Fannie Farmer. Some people say Fannie Merritt Farmer invented the modern recipe. She was one of the first to publish a book with the exact instructions for measuring and cooking. Fannie's Boston Cooking School Cookbook, often called the Fannie Farmer Cookbook, is over 100 years old, but it's so popular people still know and use it. Less is known about the real Fannie. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1857. At about the age of 16, she became ill with polio or had a mild stroke that left her with a limp in her left leg. Fannie became a mother's helper in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Charles Shaw. It seems it was there while teaching young Marcia that Fannie realized how much easier cooking would be if ingredients were measured precisely for every recipe. Fannie went on to be a teacher at the Boston Cooking School and later named its principal. After her cookbook was published in 1896, she became known all over the country. Throughout her life, Fannie had a special interest in teaching people about nutrition and health. She died in 1915. Remember, if you follow Fannie's instructions exactly, you can make griddle cakes. We sometimes call them pancakes now, for your whole family. And you will know how to flip them at precisely the right time. Cardinals, now you will get an opportunity to follow one of Fannie Farmer's recipes for Fannie Farmer's famous griddle cakes. Remember that April is Math Month. Please make sure you measure all of the ingredients correctly using your correct fractions and level them off exactly just the way Fannie Farmer would want us to do. And remember, back in this story, Fannie Farmer taught us when it was time to flip the griddle cake at the perfect time. I hope you've enjoyed this activity and you've enjoyed this time with your family. Now go get some syrup and butter and eat those famous griddle cakes.